Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Fast Keto. I'm thrilled to share this very special episode with you today. This was an interview done by Aaron Day of me on his show, the Fat for Weight Loss show. And I had such a great time chatting with Aaron. We covered so many great questions and topic areas in keto that I get asked about quite a bit. So I asked him if I could share the episode on Fast Keto as well, and he happily agreed. So I am thrilled to share this with you today. If you guys don't already subscribe, go to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to the Fat for Weight Loss show by Aaron Day. He also has a fantastic Instagram account where he shares so many delicious recipes, and you can really feel Aaron's passion for keto and for creating delicious keto recipes that make this lifestyle so much more delicious, fun, and sustainable. So be sure to go check Aaron out, and I hope you enjoy today's episode of Fast Keto with Aaron Day. I recommend you check out my 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. What it is a full 28-day meal plan and program that includes all the recipes and foods that you need to eat for 28 days. I call it the 28-day challenge because it's just a great way to get past all the information overwhelm. There's so much information online about keto, and this way you can just get past that. All the macros are calculated for you to get into a state of ketosis, and I was able to do that by using tried and true proven macro approaches that I've developed over several years of doing the keto diet and working with over 3,000 people to date on this program. Our Ketogenic Girl community in the members group is incredible. Everyone in there is so supportive, providing helpful tips and hints and sharing their successes and struggles and challenges as well in the group together, because we're all in this together gaining more health. The 20-day challenge program comes with weekly shopping lists, meal plan overviews, a guide to testing yourself and interpreting the results for keto. And it also comes with my support and coaching in our members only group. So go check it out at ketogenicgirl.com. It's the 28-day challenge, and any purchase of the 20-day meal plans gets you access into the challenge. You can choose to get the program either soft copy or with a printed copy as well. It's printed on beautiful paper, spiral bound, and I ship it out to you the same day. So go check it out, the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge at ketogenicgirl.com. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown. So you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.
So please welcome Vanessa. Vanessa, how are you doing today?
Hi, Aaron. I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well. You know, I love doing these sort of podcasts where you can talk to someone across the other side of the world. And the greatest thing about this podcast in particular is that you also have your own podcast. And so it's great to talk to someone who has already done their own podcast, already has the mic set up, and it just sounds fantastic. So I'm really, really excited to be here. Got your cookbook sitting here, and I've been a big fan for a long time. So I hope I have lots of, great questions for you. But I like to start off these podcasts with like a little personal story. And so can you tell us and, well, me and the listeners about how you moved to Prague and, maybe some of the things that came along with that?
Yeah, I think We moved to Prague about 3 years ago, and I grew up moving all around the world. So we lived mostly in China, in Beijing, and we lived in the Philippines, and we moved every few years. And I got used to having to bring all of this stuff every time we moved. When we moved to China, especially in the 90s, there was nothing there for foreigners. So we used to go to, in Canada, we call it Costco, the big box stores, and we would get cases of ketchup and things that, you take for granted back home that you just can't get when you're over there. So I got into this mindset of always having to bring all of these things, knowing that you wouldn't have them. And so I figured that, Prague, from visiting, we visited quite a bit. Before we moved here, we kind of did 3 weeks a couple times a year. And then the last time we did a month, and we wanted to see, could we make it, work for us long term? And as we were packing and preparing, I started to panic and think, they're just not going to have keto things there. Like, I just have a feeling they're not going to have, for example, keto sweeteners. What am I going to do? At the time, I was eating a lot of products with erythritol or swerve or, stevia or stevia, some people call it. And so I decided I'm just going to bring all this stuff in case. And then, if I need more, I'll get more when I go back, or I'll have my family ship me some or something. So I had one suitcase that we only took 2 suitcases with us. We sold all of our things. We each took 2 suitcases, and half of one of my suitcases was filled with bags of erythritol and stevia. So I had bags of white powder and little containers of white pills, just an entire suitcase full. And I was like, if any border agent opens this, they are going to have a field day with me. And I was like, you know what? I'll just risk it and see. I mean, we'll see how it goes. And they didn't even open my suitcase. So I managed to bring in all of this erythritol and, stevia tabs and things. And then, of course, once we got here, realized that they have it here as well. So I didn't even really need to bring as much as I did, but it must have been a pretty funny, scene. Just if anyone had opened that up, they would have been quite shocked.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because it's literally like a bag of white granular, either like crystallized or powder, or, like little tablets. And you go, all right, come on, what is this? And you're like, no, it's natural, I swear. And
exactly.
I've had packages shipped to me from the So Nourished. So Vicky and Rami from Tasteaholics, they've sent me stuff from the States. And when it comes here, it comes with a little note from the Australian government saying, we've opened your package for you and we've just checked that it's not drugs.
I know Australia's really has a history kind of being strict with imports, right? Like especially food and agriculture.
Yeah, they're pretty strict with it, and they're especially strict with it going into Indonesia as well, just because of the laws there. But yeah, it's not a great place to bring in erythritol and stevia if you're thinking about coming to Australia. We've got plenty here. So
right.
No need to bring it. Oh, that's so awesome. That story makes me so happy because I get so many packages that do get opened by the Australian government for me, which is nice of them, but I guess. So you said you moved from Canada into Prague. Maybe tell us a little bit about you and sort of what you did when you were living in Canada, and then maybe what you're doing now when you're living in Prague, and maybe some of the stuff that people may not know about you, that you've been following the ketogenic diet for a while now and the founder of Ketogenic Girl. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit for me.
Sure. I guess one thing that people may not know about me so much is that I used to work in finance, and I had my Canadian securities license to be a broker. And that's what I did coming right out of school. I worked in the finance industry and I really loved finance. I found it fascinating, but I mostly wanted to learn about business because I had always had entrepreneurial aspirations from when I was a little girl. I always had a lemonade stand. My brother and I would do a lemonade stand, Kool-Aid stand. And then later on, I had a jewelry stand that I would sell earrings and bracelets t-shirts, and I even had like little bags with the logo on them. And I just always dreamed of selling things and selling products. And my favorite thing to do as a kid was to play store. And I would take everything out of the cupboards in my parents' kitchen, put it all out on the table, and then make their dinner party guests come to my store and purchase canned goods from my store with Monopoly money. So I really had such a strong urge to have products and sell them and run a business. And I wanted to learn as much as I could as fast as possible. So I went and worked in finance. I studied publicly traded companies that were established in Vancouver, BC. And I studied how they worked, and I studied their balance sheets, and I worked at a firm that did valuations on their stock price. So we would learn really what was fundamentally valuable about a business and what made a stock more valuable than another. And I was fascinated by it. So I learned so much about business. I loved Warren Buffett. I love studying him, and he's a fundamental value investor. And that was my whole life and my whole world. And I knew at some point I would do a business. I tried and launched several online businesses kind of softly, not like in a big dramatic way, but in kind of a low risk, low profile way. And none of them really failed or worked out because I really didn't have the passion and drive and love for them. It wasn't until I failed many, many times at doing an online business. And then I also found keto, and I was able to combine everything I learned from failing at business with keto together. That was where my passion and heart was, that I was able to combine the two and have a successful business. And it's been incredible to be able to then get so busy that I had to quit what I was doing before working in finance. I was actually towards the end, I was interviewing experts in the financial field. So I was doing very similar to what I get to do with my podcast, interviewing people and asking them, experts, what they knew about business to learn about it. So it's kind of cool that I get to do that now with podcasting, and just how the two came together was through just a lot of hard work, a lot of passion, and a lot of failure and learning from failure.
Oh, that's so interesting. I had no idea that you came from such a like a financial and business background, and that it's really awesome to see the entrepreneurial passion, shine through, because a lot of the stuff you do comes with a lot of genuine, a very genuine feeling. So I guess like my first question would be is like, what were some of the failures that you learned from the other businesses that you sort of brought to what you do now and sort of turn them into a success?
Yeah, so I think I love talking about this topic, especially because I love just exploring different business models. So much of what I got to learn was actually from watching other companies fail, because at the firm I was at, we would value and we would watch companies, try to raise capital, and we would see the ones that would be successful. What was the difference between the companies that would be successful? They were looking usually for commodities like gold or silver or copper, a lot of times in Latin America or, Australia or Canada. And they had to put together a business. They had to raise capital. They had to go and find resources. I learned so much from seeing the companies that thrived and the ones that didn't. And from that, I also applied that in my own life. And a lot of the failures that I made, I think the number one was just trying to do businesses in areas that I wasn't fundamentally that interested in. So one of the businesses I was going to do was a online business selling an ebook and product that explained to people how to invest in mining companies. So I had a lot of knowledge about it, but it wasn't something that stoked my fire or passion. So I would start working on it, and then I would tell my husband about it. I would tell my parents about it. I'm doing this new business, and they were also supportive. And then a few months later, I just stopped working on it because I just didn't have the interest, like I'm great at starting things and I know that about myself, but in order to really succeed, it has to be something that you're going to do long term and that you enjoy doing long term. And so finding something that's also your hobby is huge. For me, with Ketogenic Girl, I knew two things. I wanted to start a business that was as low risk as possible. So something I could do while I was still doing my current day job. So I still had income coming in. And then also doing something that I really loved. So I love the keto space so much that I was getting up around 4 a.m. every day before work. And I was just going on Instagram and I was looking up keto recipes and posts. And I was posting and sharing things for a few hours before work every day. And then when I would have any breaks during the day, I would also be doing that. And then I get home, I would do that as well. So I loved it. I love doing that stuff. And so it became very easy to spend a lot of time on it because I enjoyed it so much just doing it without any incentive or financial incentive at all. It's something I would do today if I didn't make any money at all from it. I would still be doing it. So that was like a really big core lesson. It has to be something that you love and you're willing to do, whether or not you're being compensated in any way. And one of the most important questions I think entrepreneurs can ask themselves is, if I was a billionaire tomorrow, someone gave me all the money in the world, what would I spend my time doing? How would I spend my time if I didn't have to earn any income? And that can really tell you a lot about what you might like to build as a dream business.
Oh, that's so inspiring and so interesting at the same time. And I really like what you were saying there about having longevity and having something very sustainable. Yeah, you can jump around to those different projects, but ultimately you need something that is relatively stable and something that you really enjoy, because otherwise you won't put so much time and effort into it. Maybe that was part of the motivation for you for starting the ketogenic diet, but was there any other motivation for you from the start when you started the ketogenic diet, and were you after anything in particular when you did that?
For me, it was definitely weight loss. For a long time, I had struggled with having excess weight that I wanted to lose. And I also had a lot of subpar health. I had chronic inflammation from some autoimmune issues, and I was always really tired. And I never had the energy or vitality that I wanted. I remember just knowing that there was greater health available for me, and I just needed to figure out what it was. And so I spent a lot of time just trying to understand what's the optimal health. I took nutrition as my electives when I was in university, and I read a lot of health and nutrition books in my spare time. And when I started getting into keto, there was this weird thing about it where it was the opposite of everything I had tried up until now. That I was, well, if I've tried everything and nothing's worked, then maybe doing something totally insane and opposite to everything I've ever tried until now will work. So there was something about that turning the thinking on its head completely that really intrigued me. And I wanted a primary driver for me was just optimizing my health. I'm an optimizer, maximizer type personality. So I want to just live my life as healthy as possible. I want to lose excess weight. And my primary motivation for dealing with pain and energy is I really had a dream of having a family and starting a family. And for a long time, I became depressed because I didn't understand how I was ever going to be able to do that, because I had really low energy and I had a lot of pain in my body all the time. So if I was in the kitchen cooking for a while, after a while, I'd get really bad back pain. And it was just from standing for so long. And I was like, how am I ever going to be a mom if I can't even stand in the kitchen and make dinner without having back pain? How am I going to run after kids and take them to the park and do all these things I want to do with them and be the best mom I can be if I'm riddled with pain? I have headaches all the time. And I also don't feel comfortable in my skin and my body. How am I going to take them to the beach? How am I going to take them outside to do things? So it's still a dream of mine and my husband's to start a family. But I think that was probably one of the biggest driving motivators for me to finding keto.
Wow, yeah. It's really interesting hearing people's story, because I guess for a lot of people, they start a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet with weight loss in mind. But as soon as they find out the benefits outside of that, it quickly starts to fade away into finding that optimum health, or, that maximizing what you can do with your life, as you were saying before. Did you have any, as you were saying, you learned a little bit about nutrition at uni, and then you started to learn more and more and more. And then the ketogenic diet was sort of the flip on that. Was there any sort of backlash, I guess, when you started saying to other people that I'm going to do the ketogenic diet? Because for me, like when I started the ketogenic diet, people around me were like, that's not going to work. Isn't fat bad for you? Those types of things. Was it hard to sort of convince yourself that you're doing the right thing, or did you have some sort of external factor that was saying, yes, this is actually working for you?
It's funny. A lot of people talk about that and getting backlash from people. I just always was doing weird things most of my life. Like I was living in China and I was always trying different things. And people were just used to me always doing weird things all the time, little like self-experiments and things. So no one ever really gave me much backlash. I think that the only times I did have some comments were from my mom was a little concerned about cholesterol. And she's like, how can you eat all those avocados? How can you eat all of that heavy cream and stuff? Aren't you worried about cholesterol? And at the beginning, it was a bit difficult because because I didn't really fully understand it myself. So I'd be like, well, no, I'm not that worried because I'm getting all these other health benefits. But it just drove me to educate myself so that when people do question it, most of the questioning I actually got was not in my life. It was online from posting stuff about it and people always having those alarming questions. So even on the Ketogenic Girl Facebook page, people ask the same questions about cholesterol and all these things and saying, well, this is so crazy. How can you do this? It's weird because people would follow the page and then they would be, especially on Facebook, not as much on Instagram. People understand keto more, but especially at the beginning, people would find it because maybe they were looking for weight loss or something. And then they would be like, well, how can you eat this meal? Like there's so much cream and butter and all this stuff. So I really needed to understand how to explain it in a way that was very succinct and very quick. So to me, keto is a diet that's comprised of whole foods, single ingredient foods, where you're replacing sugar and refined and processed food-like products with real food. To me, that's what keto really is. You can do it in lots of different ways. But when you look at it from that perspective, which I have found it to be very valid from doing it for all these years, that's what it really is fundamentally. No one can argue with that. No one can argue with how good it is for you to have actual natural whole foods and get rid of sugar and eliminate processed foods. Everyone can agree on that. We can all agree that sugar is bad for you. We can all agree on all the fact that whole foods are good for you and that these processed foods are not. So that's where we can find common ground.
Yeah, that's interesting, because a lot of people do say that they have interesting times on Facebook, and I've sort of found it to be not too bad, but I understand what you're saying there with people who are starting out on the ketogenic diet or maybe starting up for weight loss. And I always recommend to people that you need to do the first few things to get your diet sorted and your life sorted to a point where you can actually start doing this. But then you actually need to read into the science for yourself, because inevitably there's going to be a question where your friends ask you what you're doing. And I guess doing the research just really backs it up for yourself. It's so great that you were saying that the whole food is such a great approach, because when you start the ketogenic diet, yes, there's all those substitutions. There's the breads and the desserts and all those types of things. And you can still have those up to a certain point, but the whole food is where the real nutrition and where all the benefits to all these types of foods are. So I totally agree with you on that one. And some of those substitutions can get a little bit overboard at some times, but going back to that whole food approach is something that is, very, very strong. Talking about whole foods, I have your Keto Essentials cookbook sitting right next to me, and there are so many delicious recipes in this book. What was the inspiration behind creating this book in particular? Were there any recipes that were, I guess, maybe particularly hard to create?
Oh man, yeah, the keto bread loaf, I remember, was the most frustrating. I think I did 12 iterations of it, and I needed to have some kind of keto bread for people in there because it is really important, I think, when you're making the transition to have substitutions, especially for the foods that we are used to, especially keto breads, especially keto treats and desserts. Over time, you might find many people that you don't need to use those anymore. You don't rely on them as much because you'd rather eat a bigger steak than, say, a smaller piece of meat with a piece of bread, keto bread. That tends to happen, and I see that a lot, but I needed to have a few of those things in the cookbook. I just remember making the bread loaves over and over again and taking them out of the oven and then them falling apart and just being like, that was a whole day and so many ingredients, so, and I know you do some keto baking and recipes yourself, so just how frustrating it is when you try something and it doesn't work out. But I did eventually get a loaf that worked relatively well and fit for the book. So I was, happy to get it done and then just move back onto recipes I prefer making, which for me are kind of more comfort foods and things that, especially from growing up in Asia, like keto pad thai, lemon chicken, a lot of the things that I love to eat at restaurants, or foods that I just grew up and love, even keto mac and cheese, keto poutine. I don't know if you know what poutine is. It's a very Canadian dish with French fries and bacon and gravy. And I made a keto version of it. And so there's all these recipes in there that I had so much fun creating. I had a lot of support from my publishers in kind of creating whatever I wanted to. So I felt really really good about that. But when I first started speaking with them, I wanted to create a guide on the keto diet, and they wanted me to do a cookbook. So we kind of met in the middle. And what's really neat about that is a lot of people get the book and they're expecting just a cookbook, and they end up having a cookbook with a lot of front matter that explains a lot about the ketogenic diet that they maybe weren't expecting. So it really adds another layer to the book that I love, that I got to share what I'm really passionate about, which is the information behind the diet, how to make it work effectively for you, and then have all these recipes so that people can just get over information overwhelm and just get started and get into it.
Yeah, that's so good, because I do see a lot of cookbooks, just cookbooks. And then there's sort of like, if you were to get the information, you might look to something like an audiobook, but having both of them together is actually really handy because it's like an all-in-one stop shop sort of book. And I do remember flipping through going, there are a lot of Asian dishes in here. And here in Australia, we have so much influence from Thai food to Indian food to Chinese food to all different sorts of Asian foods. And it's something that America in particular, I don't think really utilizes too much. They have a lot more of a Mexican influence, but I'm not sure what it's like in Canada either. But it was really, really nice to see a lot of those different styles of dishes in the recipe book. So congratulations on doing that, because it's something that, not a lot of people have done. And I remember talking to one of the other Australian food bloggers, Rachel Hurd. She was saying that being in Australia, we do have all of these Asian influences. And so I guess that's sort of a little bit of a thing that we like to do, adapt those types of things. But the recipes in there are just so fantastic. I do know that you have started a challenge, and I don't know whether the cookbook sort of ties into the challenge, but it's called the 28-Day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and whether the cookbook and the recipes in there sort of tie in with that as well?
Absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. That's what I do primarily every day. So what occupies most of my time is running the challenge. And I've been running it for over 2 years. And I had created initially meal plans based on requests from people. There were so many people asking me for how to do keto. And it went from getting a few questions an hour to getting hundreds of questions an hour. And people were just wanting to know how to do keto and how to get started. And I always say the internet is so amazing because there's so much access to information. None of us would probably have found keto without it, but there's also so much information and so many different opinions that it can lead to information overwhelm. So I created meal plans based on people's requests wanting to know how I ate. Everyone was like, how do you eat? What do you eat? I'm just going to replicate exactly what I eat. But not only that, I'm going to design it so that every single recipe in the book I've tested on myself to see and make sure that it generates ketosis for me. And knowing that I was very insulin resistant, that if it would work that way for me, that it would probably work for a lot of people. And it turns out that that's the case, and that you don't necessarily have to individualize everything, because I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a food blogger. So I just wanted to create a way for people to just get over the information overwhelm and like get in the kitchen, start cooking, and try it out for yourself, as long as you've, of course, spoken with your doctor and your care providers and made sure that it's something that's not contraindicated for you. If you have any health conditions or you're on any kind of medication, make sure that you have your doctor's approval to start a ketogenic diet and it's something that you want to do and it's not going to have any issues for you. Then you can just get on it and get started. And that by people doing a challenge, it's something that's attainable. They can do it for 28 days. And they can also just see that it's not that weird, that they're really just eating normal plates of food. And they can see that it's something that's very sustainable. It's something that they can have compliance to. And anything that's going to really work for you and give you long-term results has to be something you can do for life. And that's really why I believe most diets don't work. It's always approach with a temporary mindset, whereas this is a long-term lifestyle. And anything that you're going to do has to be something, if you're going to get results, once you get the results, you have to be able to maintain them as well. So the challenge provides that, but it also gives people support and community. That was the biggest thing that I found, is that people can go online and they can buy a meal plan or they can get even my cookbook. But then when they have a question, where do they go? Where is that support? So with the challenge, I have my support that comes with it as well. So people can post questions. I have a Facebook coaching group and they post questions and say, where can I get this product? Or what is this, blood glucose reading mean, or these things. And I can provide some feedback based on my experience. But not only that, we have this whole community of people who have been through the challenge. Maybe they've been in the group now for a couple of years and they're able to support and say, well, I'm in Australia and I found this particular product, this store, so there's this community of people helping each other. And that's been the most beautiful thing that's really come out of the challenge, is just creating that community of everyone supporting each other, helping each other, and sharing what they've learned with each other. So it's not just about me. It's about that whole greater community that, we've been able to create.
Yeah. And with community comes a sense of commitment as well. And I think something that a lot of people probably miss on just buying a meal plan and trying to do it themselves is that they don't really have anyone holding them accountable, and they don't have anyone, sort of like guiding them through. So a community is so great for that. And so what are some of the things that people come into the challenge? What are some of the common things that people are doing that might be halting their progress or maybe pushing them in the wrong direction?
Oh, I'd love to answer that question. I think one of the two biggest things that I see is people doing it with tons and tons of dairy, high fat dairy, it's a mistake that I made at the beginning too. I just thought if I just eat cream cheese and, high fat dairy, that I'll be in ketosis. And I was, but I wasn't losing weight when I was doing that. So the dairy thing is really a major factor. My program is all dairy free, and it's really something that people can try for themselves. And it's a huge misconception. And people come in and they're like, why is it dairy free? I thought keto was big on the dairy. It doesn't have to be. And there's other ways of dairy is a great way to get in your macros if you're trying to hit that 80, 15, 5 or 75, 25 or 20. If you're trying to hit high fat, it's a really easy way to make sure that you hit high fat levels, but it can cause a lot of issues for a lot of people, and it can just make them go over certain numbers or thresholds, and it just I find complicates things as well. It's easier to do things without dairy, so that's a big thing. The other thing is lack of testing. And I totally get that, because a lot of people don't have time, to do the testing. Like my husband and I don't have kids yet. I have time to do things like test different ratios on myself. A lot of people are extremely busy. They're running households. They have children. They have busy jobs. Like they just don't have time to try this and then test themselves, or they don't have that ability. So one thing that the program provides is something that is kind of tried and tested. And then we can make tweaks depending on the person. We're all very different. We all have different health histories. We all have different activity levels, different jobs, lifestyles, all these things. So the plan gives you a starting place where you don't have to test yourself in order to probably get into ketosis. I see it with most people on the program, but then you can make tweaks after that. And then if you later on want to start testing or get into it because you suddenly have more time, or it's something that you want to make time for, then you can add that in later. So there's all these different layers. You hear it a lot. People say that they're struggling and they're not getting the results that they want. But then it turns out when they test themselves, they're not actually in nutritional ketosis. So the testing can really help with that and provide that feedback along the way. Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 20-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group. And you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them. And everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive. And it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com. And it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. And now back to our interview.
Yeah, it is important to test and obviously doing what is possible with your time frame. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you eliminate dairy because I know a lot of other programs, they also eliminate dairy. And I just recently eliminated dairy from my diet and I was training for a marathon and I got to the end of it. And for me, I ended up with a higher body fat percentage than when I started out with. That's just crazy, because if you're running 42 kilometers or 26 miles, you think you would burn up a lot of that. So yeah, eliminating dairy is going to be a big factor for me. And I think a lot of other athletes should probably look into eliminating dairy. Even if you think you don't have a problem with lactose, generally the inflammation is enough to build up over time where you're not recovering properly. For most people, it can be okay. And yeah, I mean, if you're trying to optimize and maximize your health, then definitely trying to eliminate those full fat dairy options is a great thing. But if someone is sitting at home and they do have a ketone monitor or something that can test blood glucose, what is the best time of day, or what do you think you should be doing when you are testing? Is it something that you should be doing at the same time every day, or is there a particular time of day that is the optimal place to test ketones or test blood glucose?
Sure. I want to answer that. I just want to quickly go back to your running. I'm not surprised actually that your body fat percentage went up because a lot of the times when we're running a lot, the body thinks that you're running from a predator and it shuts down fat burning. So excess running can sometimes do that in the body as well through having raised cortisol levels and all these things. And I know you're not asking for my feedback on that, but I just want to mention it that I do see that, exercise is one of the things that I also see people, with keto, you need to do different kinds of exercise. And sometimes running a lot can signal to the body to hold on to fat. So I'm curious if that might be the case as well. But that's just my biohacking mindset that I want to see what it would be like for you to try dairy or keep doing it without dairy, but keep doing dairy and not be running and see what it would do as well. It's just my mindset. But back to testing, I usually suggest only testing once a day, and that's fasted in the morning, because that really gives you an indicator of how you did the day before. There's also postprandial testing. So I recommend usually people test in the morning fasted before they shower, do any activity, or before they have any coffee or anything to eat, and before they shower, because sometimes for some people, even showering, it can be a form of exercise. So it's best to do it before anything. You kind of wake up and then within about 15 minutes or so to test. I recommend testing blood glucose ideally every day, and ketones, you don't need to test them so much, maybe once a week, every other week, because as long as your blood glucose is in a good range, you will probably be in ketosis. You don't need to be necessarily testing ketones every day. So I usually recommend just focus on your blood glucose levels as much as possible. And that will usually tell you if you're being fueled primarily from glucose or you're being primarily fueled from fat. There's also postprandial testing, which I think is good for people when they're testing and trying different things. So I've been doing a carnivore trial for 30 days. And so I'm eating differently than I usually do. And I'm testing 30, 60, and 90 minutes after meals to see what happens to my blood glucose, and then kind of noticing certain trends and things. And then when I'm done the trial, which is in about 9 days, I'm going to be doing reintroductions of one different food per week to test it on my body. And I'm also going to be doing the postprandial testing. So I want to see and learn how my specific body responds to all these different foods. So those are two ways that you can really kind of biohack and learn so much about your body with testing.
Oh, that's so interesting, and doing those different tests at a particular point in your day would definitely give you more consistent results as well. You were talking a little bit about how you were doing a 30-day carnivore diet, but how has your diet changed from when you started the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge 2 years ago up until now? Has there been any fundamental shifts for you that has really helped you move in the right direction?
Yeah, so there's been two big things. The first thing, when I started keto at the beginning, I was doing a lot of, like I mentioned, high fat dairy and a lot of cream cheese and a lot of sweeteners. I quit all sweeteners just over a year ago because for me, they were perpetuating cravings for me. And I felt that I was very dependent on them. Like, as you can tell from my story at the beginning, I didn't think I could move to Prague without bringing them with me. And, I found it difficult to go to, social events or things without bringing like stevia tabs with me to put in my coffee or like make a lemonade or something. I just didn't like having that dependency. So I tried going for a week without them, and I enjoyed it so much that it's been over a year now. And now my taste buds have resensitized to sweetness in everything. I had grilled vegetables when we were in Croatia last month the eggplant tasted as sweet as a banana to me. And I almost was like, did they put something in this? And I'm often asking, my husband, he'll test things for me sometimes first. Like he'll take a bite of the whipped cream to see if it's got sugar in it. Because in Czech, they make it a lot without any sweeteners. And I often question now if there's things being, added to food because everything tastes sweet to me. And also I can detect if there's anything in food, like, sometimes they'll put sweeteners in things like scrambled eggs. And before I wouldn't have noticed. And now I can detect right away because I'm so hyper sensitive to sweetness. So I've loved going off of sweeteners and just really eating whole foods. And also I have to say at the beginning, it's a very natural and normal reaction to want to replace the foods that you're used to having. So doing mug cakes and cupcakes and breads, cloud bread, all those things. I got so excited about making those kinds of foods. And especially I made this one keto bread that I had a bit of like grass-fed butter on with sea salt, and it tasted amazing. And I really love that I could have those things, a keto version of them. But now I just prefer really nutrient-dense foods so much. So my keto at the beginning had a lot of high-fat dairy, had a lot of bread substitutes and carb substitutes, and had a lot of sweeteners. And now it looks very much just like meat with vegetables, meat and salads and savory foods. And if I want a treat, it usually is 100% dark chocolate, which tastes sweet to me. It really depends on the brands. There are some that just will taste like cardboard always, but if you find the right ones for you, they do taste sweet. And you can also add vanilla and cinnamon to make them sweet. And heavy cream tastes sweet to me now. And cheese as a dessert is a really nice, like that's how the French do it. They usually have a lot of cheese for dessert. And it's a nice savory way of ending a meal where, you have a little treat at the end because we're so used to that.
Yeah, it becomes a habit for most people to have dessert after a meal, and
Yes.
And it's something that maybe people have grown up with, or it's a very hard habit for most people to kick. So those things are, as you said before, those artificials. Well, I mean, any sort of the keto sweeteners are good as a transition, but you eventually want to wean them out. And the same thing with the keto breads. And some people may have, and this is something that I found out recently, but some people may have a high intolerance to things like salicylates that are very concentrated in things like almonds and coconut. And there's a whole range of different things that if you start having a lot of keto bread, it's a big concentration of almonds, right? And so you have one slice of that and there could be 20 almonds in there, and you're not usually used to having those. So even that switch from a high carb diet into a high almond diet almost can rock the boat a little bit too. So I definitely agree with you there on ultimately making your goal just being those really high quality foods that are relatively simple, but your taste buds morph and start enjoying those types of foods so much more when you cut out all of the excess nonsense and the noise that sort of those other foods can have. It's so good talking about food and talking about these the meal plans and things, but I've seen you being a speaker on many of the recent low carb events, and you've also got your own podcast as well, Fast Keto. And so what have you learned from presenting to people in particular? What have you learned from going across the globe and talking to people about the ketogenic diet? Is there anything that sort of like you've learned along the way that you may not have, just being behind the scenes a little bit?
I think speaking has really enabled me to share my passion and connect that back to this vision that I have of a world that is free of modern diseases that are preventable or potentially reversible from real whole foods nutrition. And that's what I love getting up on stage and talking about. I love explaining to people, how they can get into nutritional ketosis if it's not working for them. But the biggest thing is going back to the fact that we have the keys in our hands, the potential to create a world where so many people can avoid getting certain conditions that they're predisposed to, all these conditions where it's a failure potentially of the brain or body to function fully from taking up glucose. We have these neurodegenerative disorders. We have all these different conditions that we don't have to face as an inevitable part of life, that we're not all going to die from modern disease. It's possible. I've had personally in my life way too many family members leave us too soon because of conditions that I'm not saying were caused by poor nutrition, but may have been delayed, may have been had some of their suffering alleviated if we had different guidelines for having proper whole foods nutrition. And I think the policy change needs to happen. And I think that by going out and speaking as much as we can, and by spreading the information to people as much as we can, that we can influence change at the policy level where, we may be able to live in a world where not as many people suffer through some of these conditions that really rob people of their dignity. And it's such a simple solution, to embrace whole foods nutrition. And it's difficult for people to make changes. We have so much of our culture and social life and everything tied into our diet. For me, that's really been the biggest thing, is just I love getting on stage and talking about, let's spread the word about this, because proper nutrition is accessible to anyone and democratizing health is possible. We can do it. We can spread the information and we can get healthy in simple ways. We can incorporate more healthy fats into our diet. We can avoid vegetable oils and sugar and inflammation, and we can make a difference through sharing and spreading the knowledge. And so I just love that I even have the opportunity, to be invited to events to speak about what I'm passionate about and have this platform. And it's amazing to be invited and to be able to do that. And I feel so blessed that I'm able to do that.
I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Liz Williams. I don't know whether you've spoken to her on Instagram. Maybe she's at the Fit Trainer's Wife. And she brought something to my attention, and something that you highlighted in your response just before. And you were saying that change is so important. And she was saying, it's great to be able to do all of these things for the ketogenic community in life, really. But we really need to be pushing for change, because that is such a driving force into what is the future. It's so great to hear that you're also very behind changing the way that we not only look at nutrition, but look at the way we fight diseases, and look at the way that we can manipulate our own health by just using whole foods. And yeah, as you said before, democratizing the food that we eat. I think a lot of the misconception that people have is that ketogenic or a low carb diet can be quite expensive. And on the flip side, you don't have to have, there's a documentary that was released on Netflix by a chef here in Australia, Pete Evans, another guy as well, called The Magic Pill. And it's amazing how there was one of the ladies who was able to completely eliminate how much insulin she was having over a month, which ended up costing her about $1,000 a month or something crazy. And so for her, being on a ketogenic diet is actually cheaper because she doesn't have to spend so much money on all this medication anymore. And for a lot of people, those health risks and health benefits are just, an investment in the food that you eat. So I like to end the podcast on a few quick questions. And I guess sometimes they're quick, but sometimes we like to dig deep in some of these things. Let's start off with the first one. So do you have a favorite ketogenic food, something that you really, really enjoy?
You know what I think my most favorite keto food is so underrated is mayo. I love mayonnaise, and I love making it myself at home or finding really clean versions that you can use. And I just think it's such an underrated condiment, and yet it makes so many things so delicious. And you can flavor it in all these different ways. You can add things to it. It's really my favorite thing. And it becomes your best friend when you're doing keto. And it's such a great way to get in healthy fats, especially if you get, one that's based on avocado oil, or you make it yourself at home, or you find a really good source. And you can add it to so many things and make it one of my favorite recipes from the 20-day challenge is my bacon carbonara. And it's just the 0 carb noodles with mayonnaise, and bacon, and then some herbs like some basil, and I think there's a bit of garlic and onion powder in there, and sea salt, and it is so delicious. And people always just go, I love, love, love this pasta recipe, and it's just so simple, and it's just with mayonnaise, and it's so versatile. You can do so many things with it. So it's just absolutely my all-time favorite keto food.
That's a really good idea, switching out the dairy in creamy pastas for mayonnaise.
Yes.
Such a great idea. That's very, very clever. And that's the hard thing when you eliminate dairy, is like you try and add that creaminess back into things, and sometimes it's hard, but I guess that emulsion between I guess the egg yolks and whatever type of oil you're using must be just that right amount of creaminess. I've always
and if you add nutritional yeast too, then it's yeast pasta, and you're getting all those incredible B vitamins.
I've always had this weird thing in the back of my mind on creating emulsified MCT oil, because you know how MCT oil is really hard to mix through your coffee, but cream isn't. Mm. I've always wondered if you could make some sort of I don't know if this would work. I'd have to try it out. But like emulsifying MCT oil with egg yolks and almost turning it into a mayonnaise per se, but it would just be a pretty neutral flavored mayonnaise that you can mix in with coffee to make a bulletproof coffee. I don't know whether that would work, but it sounds interesting.
Gotta try it. It just sounds like a fun thing to experiment with. And I bet if you did, have you ever done, MCT oil with collagen or gelatin?
Oh, no, I haven't tried that. I've always, savored the collagen because it's quite expensive here in Australia. So I'm like, I'm going to save that for when I really need it.
Yeah, so I get just, there's a local store here where I just get basic gelatin, and it comes in these sheets. It costs nothing. And I just add that to my coffee, and sometimes with coconut oil, and the gelatin makes it so frothy when you use, an immersion blender. But I bet if you did that, with MCT oil, it would probably... You could try that as well in your experiments.
I'll do an Instagram story and I'll tag you in it. But if it's not good, I won't tag you in it. I'll pour it down the sink.
Yeah. Just pretend that one didn't happen.
Food aside, do you have a particularly favorite exercise? Is there something that you enjoy doing that maybe gets your body moving in some shape or form?
I used to be such a crazy exerciser, especially with running. And I would run like an hour to sometimes 2 hours a day. And when I lived in Vancouver, I would run along the ocean. So it was really beautiful. And I one day realized I love running on this path, but what do I love more than anything? It's just walking on this path and listening to audiobooks. And I have to say, walking is my favorite activity. It's my favorite exercise, going for long walks and listening to podcasts, and also walking with my husband. So we also, like they say, walking is hiking, hiking is walking, hiking, sort of walking, through cities. Like we've been doing so much travel this weekend. We went and walked through this old, beautiful town with a castle, and we were hiking pretty much because you're going up tons and tons of stairs up into the tower. We did the same thing in Croatia, just walking in the old town. And if I'm not listening to a podcast, of being in a beautiful environment, whether it's along a river or along the ocean, and just walking, I think, is one of the best things you can do for your body. It doesn't put a lot of stress on the body, and yet you get so many great benefits from, your cardiovascular system, for lowering blood pressure, and without having all that added stress from cortisol. So I would say walking is it's such a simple thing. And yet walking in nature, walking in the forest bathing, walking in a beautiful city, listening to audiobooks, like it's just so beneficial. I don't think there's any exercise I love more.
That's really awesome that you say you listen to audiobooks, because I do the same thing. I don't actually read books that much. If they're not on Audible, I don't get them, because
Audible's the best.
Yeah, it's so good.
You're reading with your ears instead of your eyes. Yeah. It's just using a different sense organ for them. But yeah, they're awesome.
And even for people who drive a lot as well, audiobooks are just a lifesaver, because you can't really I could understand maybe if some people could multitask and walk and read, but maybe you might get a little bit walk sick, but it's a little bit hard to drive a car and read a book at the same time. So audiobooks are
not recommended.
Yeah. So in contrast to your favorite food, what is your least favorite keto food?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if there is one. um that's a tough one. I think maybe bone broth, I think, is probably my least favorite. And I think it's because I overdid it. When I started keto, we had a slow cooker and I was making bone broth all the time in our slow cooker. And it was just excessive. Like was joking, our whole apartment smelled like bone broth and our cats
Yeah.
were going crazy because it smelled like bone broth. And it was almost like too much. And I almost just got to the point where I don't really find it that appealing anymore. And I'm much preferring just using like gelatin or collagen, instead of making the bone broth all the time. So I might like get into it again at some point, but I think it's just, yeah, I just overdid it.
I'm always fearful that when I've made bone broth that the house just smells of bone broth.
Yes.
And
Yes.
because you have to, you
It
bake the
does.
bone, then you put them in the slow cooker and whatever. And it just like, yeah, especially being in an apartment, you can't really get rid of it that quickly. So
No.
I'm with you on that one. And I guess like what, in contrast to your favorite exercise, what is something that you do not like to do as exercise? Maybe some people say they are not a big fan of deadlifts, or they're not a big fan of running, or whatever it is. Is there something that maybe is like that for you?
Yeah, for me, it's really intense cardio. And I think it's just because it's been sold and marketed to us, especially women, that it's the best way to burn fat. And it's also, I'm sure for men as well. And it isn't. It's the worst thing you can do to burn fat. It shuts down fat burning in the body. Like there is literally no exercise you could do that's worse for you if your goal is to optimize your body composition long term. And I'm not talking about marathon runners or anyone who does it professionally. They are way more educated on the topic than I am. But if your goal is to burn fat, it's the last thing that you want to be doing. And it also sucks. Like it's just not fun to do, and there must be something to that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And like with the experience now of running a marathon, I just don't think there are many people who run marathons out there doing it in a low carb ketogenic state. There's plenty of marathon runners who are doing it in a high carb state. And I know Zach Bitter does it to the point where he can be fat adapted enough to be able to top up with glycogen when he needs to. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, like I think being in a low carb state really puts a lot of stress on your adrenals and a whole bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I would probably have to agree with you. So do you have maybe an audiobook or a video that has recently inspired you, or something that you go back to all the time?
There's two main ones. The one most recently for me has been The Untethered Soul. I'm not sure if you've heard of that book, but it really had such a positive impact in my life. And the other one is The Power of Now. And they're both really about mindfully observing your thoughts. And I read The Power of Now when I was in university, and it was the book that had the most significant impact on my life. I couldn't put it down from the moment I started reading it. We have a very active, especially if you have an active mind, most of us do. And you don't realize how our thoughts affect our behavior because they drive our feelings and emotions. And you can be aware, you can start observing and monitoring what you're thinking, and not only realize that not everything you think is true or real. Sometimes we think thoughts that are really untrue, and yet we believe them and we feel the emotions and feelings from them. And a lot of times we self-sabotage without realizing. So it's been awesome to reconnect with that again through The Untethered Soul. It's very similar to The Power of Now. It really makes you mindful and conscious. And, we spend so much time figuring out our macros and what to eat every day. And we also spend so much time figuring out what to wear every day, but we don't choose our thoughts in the same way that we choose what to wear. And it is probably the most powerful thing, is what you're dressing your mind with every day in terms of your thoughts and focus. And meditation and yoga really helps cement that, process, and helps, stretch that muscle of being mindful of what you're thinking. But it has had the biggest positive impact on my life is really that book as of late.
That's awesome. I really love hearing people's book recommendations because I generally go and download it straight away. So The Untethered Soul and
Awesome.
The Power of Now. I'm going to go check that out. And if anyone else wants to check that out who's listening to the podcast, it'll all be in the show notes. Everything that we've discussed will all be in the show notes. And so I used to be a musician for a very long time. And
Cool.
so I really like hearing people's music taste. And so is there any music that you've been listening to recently, or in contrast, is there something that, that you've always loved and a certain genre that you go back to all the time, or maybe even a playlist?
My favorite music has always been reggaeton.
Oh,
I
no
love
way.
dancehall and reggaeton. I just love music that you can dance to, and also like a lot of Latin music.
Yeah.
But my husband and I recently went to Tanzania in February. We had such a powerful experience while we were there. So we've been playing a lot of African music lately, and it has like some reggaeton kind of vibes to it, but it also has a lot of just like really good beats. And like it reminds me of when I was really into DJ Alban, and probably no one knows who that is, but it's like an African dancehall artist. And I just love that Caribbean carefree music. There's a lot of positivity in it, a lot of really good values expressed in it. And it's all about just like making the most of life, being happy, enjoying life, and, not kind of focusing so much on what's going wrong, but on how you want your life to be, how you want to design your life to be, and, positivity. So I really like that kind of music.
Oh, that's so awesome that you say that, because I'm a huge fan of reggae. And I guess reggae and
Awesome.
reggaeton are similar, but
Yes.
we're very close to New Zealand. And they just have some amazing bands come out of New Zealand.
Is it Maori?
Maori, yeah. The Maori culture, yeah. There's the Maori culture and then everything in between. People like Fat Freddy's Drop and the Black Seeds and all of those types of artists are just, fantastic. And DJ Alban, yeah. I do know who that is. That's awesome.
Oh,
Very
awesome.
That's so good. I'm going to go play some of that when this podcast is finished, because that's awesome.
Awesome.
I usually like to end the podcast. We've been sort of ending the podcast with these quick questions, but with a recipe. So I don't know whether you alluded to it before and if it's the same one, but is there a recipe that maybe someone can take away from this podcast? And then do you have any advice for people out there who might be trying keto for the first time and are struggling with their weight? And what advice would you give them? And maybe what advice would help them point in the right direction?
Yeah, I can answer that kind of with the same answer, which is, my favorite recipe. If you are going to cut out dairy, it's really one of the best ways to break a stall or see results if you haven't been. And don't worry so much about using high fat dairy to hit really high numbers of fat. You don't have to be hitting tons and tons of grams of fat in order to be in nutritional ketosis. You just have to control carbohydrates and to some extent moderate protein. But if you cut out dairy, you can still, get into nutritional ketosis. And one of the best ways of doing it is, replacing the dairy, like I said, in my favorite recipe, bacon carbonara, with 0-carb noodles and mayonnaise with some garlic, fresh herbs in there, spices. And I like to put bacon in it, or you can put salmon or your favorite protein in it as well, even chicken. Basically, it's such a versatile dish. But you just replace the dairy with mayonnaise, or if you really like that cheesy flavor, add a tablespoon or 2 of nutritional yeast to it. It gives it this nutty, cheesy flavor, and you feel like you're eating full dairy pasta noodles without any of the dairy. So it's great to just have a replacement for that. If you're eliminating dairy, life doesn't have to have zero pleasure in it. And, it can be something that you also do temporarily. I like to enjoy dairy as a part of my lifestyle, but I also have to cut it out for periods sometimes. So, it's something that you can play with and, try cutting out the dairy and see if you get results and test yourself. Also, if you are into that, if you like testing yourself and learning about your body, it's the best way that you can learn about your body.
That's such great advice. And if you are confused on how to test yourself, maybe go back to about the middle of the podcast where we discuss what is the best time to do that. But you've probably listened to that if you've got to the right of the end of the podcast. So Vanessa, where can people find you? Where can people get in contact? And maybe where can people look for the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge, and maybe look for some of your cookbooks as well, or anything else that you've got going?
Absolutely. And so my most active social media is my Instagram, which is Ketogenic Girl. And if you want to send me any kind of message, the best way to do it is through the Facebook page, which is it's the Ketogenic Girl. And I'm always on Facebook because that's where our 20-day challenge group is. And so I'm on there all day supporting and coaching and providing feedback. So if you want to reach me, that's the fastest way to do it. I'm not checking messages and other things as actively. I'm not as good with it as I am on Facebook. And if you don't have Facebook, you can always just comment on a post on Instagram if you have a question. And I try to get to all the comments as often as I can. It's what I love doing. And I consider it a privilege to be able to, share the information that I can, that I've learned through all my mistakes that I made in keto. So that's, some of the most active places. And the 20-day challenge is available at ketogenicgirl.com. You can check it out on the website there.
That's awesome. And what I want you to do right now is pause this podcast, go and subscribe to Fast Keto. You should be able to find it by typing it into your favorite podcast service. Type in Fast Keto. Vanessa's podcast should come straight up, and subscribe to it for us, and go ahead and listen to all the podcast in there as well. Because it's been such an honor to interview you, because to be honest, I was nervous starting this podcast, because it's a little bit nerve-wracking going into a podcast with someone else who's so experienced. And you've had a lot of experience with the ketogenic diet and, talking to people and running all of this yourself. So I just wanted to say thank you, and thank you for taking the time out. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate the knowledge that you have. And I'm sure everyone who's been listening has also appreciated that as well.
Awesome. Well, you're so great at interviewing and asked some really great questions, and it was really fun to be here and chat with you. So thanks so much for having me on.
No worries. Thank you very much, Vanessa.